I'm not young, not by a long shot, at least not in internet years. I'm not exactly old either, probably not collecting social security just yet, but let's say I'm seasoned. Probably older than most of you reading this though. I grew up in a time before cell phones were ubiquitous, before every thought and fleeting image was plastered online. The internet, when I was a kid, was a screeching dial-up modem and a clunky browser, a pretty new thing, mostly for academics and the curious. We didn't have sprawling forums or subreddits to share weird or scary stories. Sometimes, late at night, I wish there had been something like that back then. Maybe I would have gotten some advice, some validation, or at least have a better record than a spotty memory, hazed over with the deliberate fog of alcohol and drug use that defined much of my 20s. A desperate attempt to blur the sharp edges of what I'd seen. Honestly, I had mostly forgotten the crystalline, horrifying truth of this incident, convinced myself it was a nightmare, a product of adolescent angst. That is, until recently, when it all came flooding back like a nightmarish, icy wave dragging me under. I think my brain, in its own clumsy way, tried to protect me from the trauma, buried it so deep under layers of denial and time that it took decades to bubble back to the surface. Well, it's at the surface now, all right? Clawing its way out. Now that it's back. But I'm jumping ahead, getting tangled in. The then and now. So let's rewind. Let's start at the beginning. The year was 1996. I was 14 years old, a thoroughly unremarkable teenager living in a small, almost forgotten California town nestled deep in the mountains. My parents, or rather my father, had purchased a house there. He'd become thoroughly disenfranchised with life in the sprawling, anonymous city, tired of the noise, the crime, the relentless pace. He wanted to go somewhere quiet, somewhere that our closest neighbor was nearly a mile away, separated by thick swathes of pine and oak. I can't say this sudden uprooting made me or my sister Katie too terribly happy. We were city kids, accustomed to the convenience and the company. We lost all our friends, our familiar haunts, and ended up in the small consolidated county school that involved an hour-long, bone-jarring bus ride to and from the campus morning and night. Katie, bless her, made new friends quickly. She was 2 years older than me, 16, and possessed a natural effervescence. He was pretty, popular, and the kind of person that people were inexplicably drawn to, like moths to a warm, inviting flame. I, on the other hand, was her polar opposite. Short for my age, awkward in my own skin, and quiet to the point of near invisibility. Suffice to say, I got picked on a lot by the local kids, who saw me as an easy target, and I didn't adjust super well to our new, isolated existence. My father, however, saw my discomfort as an opportunity. "This will toughen you up, son," he'd declare, a little too enthusiastically. "Teach you some things about how to take care of our new home, real-world skills." His pronouncements often had an air of finality. "If you're just going to be moping around the house all summer long, then you might as well learn some life stuff." And that, as they say, was that. I cast one last, longing look at my new PlayStation, still in its box, and my pristine copy of Resident Evil that I'd saved my allowance for weeks to buy. Then, I was put to work. To work. That summer was a blur of manual labor. I cleaned gutters choked with pine needles and last year's leaves, mowed the expansive, uneven lawn that seemed to grow back overnight, helped my dad repaint the peeling garage, stirring thick, viscous paint under the hot California sun. And finally, the most important task to this story. I helped him build a new woodshed. I say helped, but in reality, he mostly directed, offered gruff encouragement, and talked me through it, while I did the majority of the physical labor. I think he always wished I was more the type to work with my hands, to find satisfaction in tangible creation, even though, especially at that age, I was far more interested in drawing fantastical creatures in my sketchbook, writing clumsy short stories, losing myself in video games, and definitely not sitting in the blistering sun building a shed. "You got to get you some calluses, kiddo," he would say, slapping my back with a hand roughened by his own years of work. Builds character. Honestly, I'm not sure if I built any character that summer, but I for damn sure built that woodshed. Old discarded grocery store pallets, salvaged from behind the town's only supermarket, made up the flooring, laid over leveled earth. But the walls and roof were constructed from these huge, unwieldy, corrugated aluminum sheets, designed to make sure the rain and snow ran off and away from the precious wood piles that would keep us warm in the harsh mountain winters. I cut myself so many damn times, wrestling those sharp-edged sheets into place. My hands and arms looked like I'd lost a particularly vicious fight with a razor blade factory. Little nicks, deeper gashes, blood welling up constantly. Sometimes, in the darker recesses of my mind, I wonder if all the blood I spilled in that patch of grass, soaking into the dry soil, summoned them, like I accidentally performed some bizarre, unintentional ritual. Step 1. Spill a pint of adolescent blood onto your recently acquired backyard lawn. Step 2. Curse profusely and creatively while attempting to erect a woodshed with your well-meaning but demanding father laughing at your ineptitude the whole time. Step 3. Spend every subsequent night praying to whatever deity might be listening that you don't have to spend another second working on, in, or near that damn shed. And step 4. Unwittingly summon an unholy, predatory entity that permanently scars you, steals your family, and leaves you a broken mess, repressing memories for the better part of your adult life. It's a pretty specific ritual, if you ask me. I'm mostly joking, though. I have to be. It probably had nothing to do with the blood or the shed itself. The shed is just where he first appeared. I can remember that night with a chilling, unwelcome clarity that I wish I could erase. It was the night I finally finished building the shed. Hours spent aligning the last few aluminum panels, securing them with screws that bit into the wooden frame. My muscles aching, my skin sunburned and stinging. I remember my dad actually telling me I did a good job as he inspected my work, running a critical eye over the joints and the roofline. A rare, and therefore highly valued piece of praise. He even brought me an ice-cold Coke with dinner, a small ceremony. Said it would be a beer if you were a little older, son. He'd rumbled, a ghost of a smile on his face. And honestly, despite my earlier resentment, I appreciated the gesture. I know I sometimes make him seem like a hard ass, but the reality was that he was a good man, fundamentally decent, just very old school in his sensibilities. He believed in tough love and self-reliance. After dinner, I finally escaped up to my room and spent some long overdue time with my PlayStation. My sister Katie had left for the night. She was going on her first proper date with a boy she'd met at school, a local kid named Mark, who played on the football team. She'd been a bundle of nerves and excitement all afternoon. Since she was going to be out late, probably past her usual curfew, my parents, in a moment of uncharacteristic leniency fueled by my shed-building triumph, agreed I'd earned it and said that I could stay up as late as I wanted. My hands throbbed, a dull ache from gripping tools and handling sharp metal, and I was bone-weary, exhausted, but I honestly didn't care. I felt like I'd earned my time to relax and enjoy myself. It felt good, that small victory. I stayed up way too late, lost in the pixelated corridors and jump scares of Resident Evil. The digital clock on my bedside table eventually rolled over to 1:30 a.m. With a sigh, I finally told myself I should get some sleep. because who knew what fresh hell of chores Dad had lined up for me the next day. After brushing my teeth and getting ready for bed, I went to my window, a habit I developed. Our house was on a slight incline, and my second-story window overlooked the backyard and the newly constructed woodshed. I looked out at my handiwork, silhouetted against the moonlit yard. Actually, I was pretty proud of myself. It looked solid, functional, and that's when I saw it. At first, a fleeting shape in the periphery, I thought it was my dad, maybe stepping out for a late-night smoke or checking on something. But as my eyes adjusted to the deep dark of the rural night, I realized the figure was far too tall, and possibly unnaturally so. Far too lanky, like a scarecrow, crudely assembled from sticks, and far, far too pale, a sickly, moon-bleached white. Its clothes, if you could call them that, hung off its thin, skeletal frame in ragged, dark tatters that seemed to billow and shift in the night breeze, even though the air felt still to me. It walked slowly around the shed, almost caressing it, gliding one elongated, pale hand against the aluminum wall. Tink, 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 tink. The sound was faint, but distinct. The sound of its fingernails, or perhaps bony protrusions, clicking against the corrugations in the metal. It was a delicate, almost curious sound, yet deeply unsettling. Then it looked up, directly at my window, directly at me. There was a shine in its eyes, an unnatural luminescence, like the retroreflective gleam a raccoon or a deer has when you catch it in your headlights, but more intense, more focused, and utterly devoid of animal warmth. Its face was gaunt and hollowed out. Sunken cheeks made its cheekbones look like sharp, cruel daggers, jutting out from the sides of its face. Its mouth was little more than a thin, bloodless line, a severe slash of nothingness, drawn onto its low-set jaw. It wriggled, slightly, like a worm, under a stone, as it lifted its gaze fully onto me. I shouldn't have been able to hear its soft whisper from that distance across the yard and through a closed window, yet I could. Very easily. It didn't travel through the air, so much as it manifested directly in my ears. A high, thin, reedy pitch, similar to someone rubbing a wetted finger around the rim of a half-full crystal glass. A sound that vibrated deep in my bones. It shuddered, a manufactured, deceptive weakness, mirroring its frail-looking frame. Come out to play, or I come in. It then cocked its head at an impossible, unnatural angle, the movement jerky and wrong, and twisted it further and further, bones audibly popping and grating, until it was looking at me almost completely upside down, its shining eyes boring into mine. It hummed, then, a low, resonant drone that filled the air around me, not just in my ears, but a physical pressure against my eardrums. The floor beneath my bare feet began to vibrate at that odd, disquieting frequency, and the resonance traveled up through my legs and into my chest, making my heart hammer in a panicked rhythm. I tried to cry out for my parents, to scream, to make any sound at all, but I felt utterly paralyzed, a statue carved from fear. My lungs wouldn't draw breath. My vocal cords wouldn't work. I still don't know to this day if it did something to me, some psychic restraint, or if I was just so monumentally, abjectly scared that my body simply shut down. I watched, helpless, as it twisted its entire body into a bizarre, contorted angle and then skittered, spider-like, with horrifying speed from the woodshed to the side of the house. It moved with a fluid, boneless grace that was utterly at odds with its jerky, angular frame. I could hear it then, a dry, scrabbling sound, clambering up the wooden siding of the house, moving with impossible agility towards my second-story window. My feet finally broke free from their invisible moorings on the wooden floor, and I stumbled backwards, a choked gasp escaping me, towards the door to my room. "Dad, Mom!" exclamation mark I remember saying, or maybe just thinking it desperately. I honestly can't be sure if it was a shout or a hoarse whisper, though I would quickly realize it didn't really matter. The face suddenly appeared in my window, pressed close against the glass. It was close enough, now, that I could make out its horrifying features in more sickening detail. The eyes still gleamed from the sunken, shadowed pits of its sockets. The thin line of its mouth still quivered as it hummed that awful, vibrating noise. Paper-thin, translucent skin was stretched so tightly across its skull that you could almost make out the dark tracery of blood pumping sluggishly in the veins of its face. The humming stopped abruptly. Its mouth stretched open, wider and wider, into an awful black, void-like maw, far larger than should have been possible. And then it clapped its jaw together, quickly and sharply, over and over and over again. The snapping noise of its mouth opening and closing at high speed sounded like an old camera shutter, rapidly taking pictures, or perhaps like dry bones clacking together. Clack, 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 clack. I barely had time to think, to even register if I had locked my window earlier. I hadn't. I never did, before the creature slid its long, pale, bony fingers into the slight crack at the bottom of the windowsill, and with a sickening screech of wood against wood, lifted it. It slithered through the opening, like liquid, pouring itself into my room, its limbs bending at impossible angles. Before its feet, or whatever it had, touched the ground, I'd flung my bedroom door open and bolted into the hallway, screaming for my parents. They were still asleep in their bed, undisturbed. I ran over to my father's side and started shaking him frantically, trying to wake him up, but it was like he was in a deep coma. I shook and shook, yelling his name, but his eyes stayed closed, his breathing deep and even, his body utterly still and unresponsive. Panic clawing at my throat. I ran around the bed to try the same thing with my mother, screaming like a madman the whole time for them to wake up, to help me. Nothing. They were lost to the world. "Sleep like little angels," a voice whispered from the doorway of my parents' bedroom. It was that same reedy glass-rimmed tone. "Sleep like little angels. Sleep like the dead." It stood there, in the frame of their door. It looked even taller than before, as if it was wreathed in shifting, deepening shadows, its form subtly distorting the light around it. Its head twisted unnaturally again, that sickening popping sound echoing in the quiet hall. It wrapped its spidery fingers around the doorframe, knuckles white and prominent, as if it was about to pounce. And that's when I heard it, the faint, telltale click of the front door opening downstairs. It was quiet, hesitant. My sister, Katie, trying to sneak in after her curfew, no doubt. Not quiet enough, though. Not for this thing. The creature spun its head around with terrifying speed, a full 180-degree rotation on its thin neck, reacting instantly to the new presence in the house. Before I could even form a thought, let alone react, it was making its way to the stairs with that same unnatural grace and horrifying fluidity. Its hands and feet, tipped with what looked like claws, clawed at the wallpapered walls as it moved, leaving deep gouges, knocking framed family pictures down. I could hear them clattering, the glass shattering on the wooden floorboards below. I ran after it, a primal urge to protect overriding my terror, not even sure what the hell I was planning to do against that. I reached the top of the stairs, just as it vanished down into the darkness of the lower floor. And then I heard my sister let out one of the most terrifying, blood-curdling screams I've ever heard in my life, before or since. A sound of pure, unadulterated horror that cut right through me. From the landing at the top of the stairs, I watched, frozen in a new dimension of terror, as the thing encircled my sister like a monstrous constrictor. She was in the small entryway, her keys and purse scattered on the floor, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Its thin, impossibly long fingers, like animated branches, grabbed her throat, squeezing, cutting short that awful scream into a painful, choked wheeze. It opened its cavernous mouth again, that awful void, and made that camera shutter, clacking sound, a few more times, inches from her face, as if capturing her final moments, her terror. Clack, clack, clack. Then it did something I still can't even begin to fathom, or properly do justice with my inadequate words. It drained the life from her. I could see it happening. Horrifying, visible process. Her eyes, wide with unimaginable terror, seemed to lose their focus as her form shimmered, blurred, and what I can only describe as her soul, her essence, her vitality, was visibly, tangibly ripped from her body like a silver mist and drawn into that horrid creature's gaping, open mouth. Her vibrant, blonde hair instantly turned a brittle, lifeless white. Her skin, moments before, flushed from a summer evening, went pallid and gray, shriveling, until she almost looked like a smaller, more fragile version of the thing that was killing her. A desperate, incoherent roar ripped from my own throat, and I bolted down the stairs, a wild, futile attempt to stop what I was seeing. But I was quickly, almost casually, flung away. It reached out one impossibly long, thin arm without even looking at me and threw me backward with little to no apparent effort. I slammed hard against the stairway wall and then tumbled, my leg twisting beneath me with an audible, sickening snap. I watched, screaming in a terrible miasma of terror, agony, and utter helplessness as it drained every last drop of life from my sister and left her a sunken, wide-eyed, desiccated shell on the floor of our entryway. I knew what was next. It would come for me. It turned its head, those gleaming, predatory eyes rolling in their sockets, and stretched that thin, bloodless line of a mouth into a grotesque, triumphant facsimile of a smile. My end was here. And then it just turned away. It slithered, with that same serpentine grace, through the still half-open front door, and disappeared into the night, leaving me alone. I was left there, leg shattered, nerve endings screaming, mind utterly broken, staring helplessly at my sister's lifeless, changed body. It felt like I was lying there for hours, the world muted, soaking in the impossible horror of the scene around me. The sharp, acute pain in my leg eventually faded into a dull, throbbing shock, and disconnected thoughts raced through my mind, chief among them. Why didn't it kill me too? Why leave a witness? The screams of my parents, when they finally, inexplicably woke up hours later and found us, seemed like they were happening in another world, faint and distant, like the distant cries of tortured souls being carried on a cold, mournful wind. They never really recovered from the loss, from that night. The police, of course, arrived and created a narrative that made sense to them, a logical explanation for an illogical horror. A prowler, they surmised, broke into an isolated home in the mountains. The kids, myself, and my sister startled this prowler, and he attacked us in panic. My leg was broken in the struggle, a defensive wound perhaps. And my sister, my poor vibrant sister, was apparently scared to death. Heart failure due to an acute stress response. The coroner's report eventually blandly stated, "What kind of healthy, vibrant 16-year-old girl has fatal heart failure from being scared?" It was a convenient if utterly unbelievable, lie. My parents, shattered and desperate for any explanation that didn't involve monsters in the dark, bought it though. Or at least, they pretended to. Unfortunately, they never forgave themselves for sleeping through the encounter, for not being there to protect their children, despite the undeniable fact that the creature had obviously somehow put them into that deep, comatose state while it attacked us. My mother and father, their shared grief, a chasm between them, separated a few years later. Shortly after that, my father, a man already prone to seeking solace in the bottle, drank himself to death. A slow, sad suicide. My mother hasn't spoken to me in years. She fell down her own shame spiral, a vortex of guilt and sorrow that led her to isolating herself from me, from everyone, perhaps to protect herself from the constant, agonizing pain of remembering. I, on the other hand, I just forgot. Or rather, my mind, in an act of self-preservation, allowed me to forget as much about the concrete details of the encounter as it would allow. I too decided the police story, the official version, was easier to digest than the sanity-shattering truth. And maybe it helped, for a time. Maybe I'd be a raving, institutionalized lunatic otherwise. I can't say remembering all of this now, in such vivid, visceral detail, has helped my mental health at all. It feels like reopening a festering wound. And that brings us, finally, to now, to the present day, and to what brought back these deeply buried, horrific memories in the first place. It's a much shorter story, this part, but one I'm desperately hoping won't be my last to tell. 3 nights ago, I saw it again. I'd gotten home late from work, exhausted. Trying to relax, I slumped into my worn armchair to watch some mindless television before bed. Predictably, I ended up falling asleep in my chair, mouth agape, and woke up sometime later to an infomercial for some useless kitchen gadget playing way too loud. The host's cheerful voice grating on my sleep-fogged brain. I fumbled for the remote, shut off the TV, and checked my phone for the time. It was 1:30 in the morning. In that precise moment, a deep, profound chill went down my spine. A cold dread that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. That first faint tinge of memory, the specific time, came to me like a frigid, unwelcome wave. I felt an inexplicable, powerful compulsion to go to the window of my third-floor apartment, almost like some unseen hand was guiding me, gently but firmly pushing me forward. And I know how that sounds, like something out of a cheap horror novel, but it's the God's honest truth. I looked out into the central courtyard of my apartment building, expecting to see the dimly lit parking lot, the communal pool shimmering under the security lights, and the entryway to the complex. Instead, I saw my parents' old backyard, a sight I hadn't laid eyes on, not even in photographs, in almost 30 years. The overgrown grass, the dark line of the forest beyond, and there, standing stark and menacing under the pale moonlight, was the woodshed I built. And standing next to it, partially obscured by shadow, was the tall, gaunt, pale man, dressed in those flowing, tattered rags. His eyes were shining with that same predatory light, and his head was cocked at that horribly familiar, unnatural angle. I felt a single, hot tear roll down my cheek. Flashes of my sister's face, frozen in that rictus of ultimate horror, burned behind my eyelids. The memory of her life being stolen, her essence devoured, slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. And before I knew it, before I could even process the impossible vision outside, the thing was at my window, my apartment window, 3 stories up, peering in at me, its eyes unblinking, fixed. The window which I always keep locked, slowly, silently slid open, as if by an unseen force. I stumbled backward. A strangled cry caught in my throat. The creature slid through the crack, that impossible serpentine way that it had, and stood before me in my small living room, somehow even taller, even more menacing than I remembered. Its thin, bloodless line of a mouth dropped open, that awful, cavernous maw appearing once more. And then it released a sound. It released my sister's horrifying, final scream from somewhere deep down inside its monstrous form, a perfect, chilling echo from 3 decades past. Then it did its quick, shuddering, clacking motion with its jaw. Clack, clack, clack. Sleep like the dead, it whispered. Its voice, the same high, reedy vibration that had haunted my nightmares for years. It reached for me with those long, bony fingers, and I screamed. And then it was daylight. Bright sunlight was streaming through the still open window. The creature was gone. My clock read 8:30 a.m. 7 hours had passed in what felt like an instant of pure terror. I've spent a long time these past few days wondering if I'm dead and just don't realize it, or if I'm finally irrevocably insane. Maybe being dead would be preferable. Maybe it'd be better for me to be trapped inside that monstrosity, my essence fueling it, like my sister. At least then I wouldn't be here, alone in my apartment, with every shadow looking too long, every creak of the building sounding like soft footfalls, just wondering when it's coming back for me. Because I know it will. It left me once. I don't think it'll make that mistake again. If you enjoyed this story and want to support the channel, please do hit that like button, subscribe for more chills, and maybe even ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next nightmare. Sharing the video with a fellow connoisseur